Everything changed the moment Chuck Norris heard whispers in that quiet American neighborhood about a teenager everyone called a troublemaker. He was standing on the edge of a neatly trimmed lawn, surrounded by rows of cozy houses and picket fences that all looked alike, but he sensed that something bigger than gossip was at play. He listened intently when neighbors spoke in hushed tones about missing mail, broken windows, vandalized gardens, and accusations directed at a lanky kid named Travis. Travis had a lean build, tousled hair, and a gaze that always seemed to hover between defiance and sorrow. People said he was bad news, a hopeless case, and that he invited chaos wherever he went. But Chuck wondered if there was more to the story. Therefore, he decided to observe rather than judge. He realized that too many eyes were already on this boy, eyes that only saw guilt, yet Chuck had a different approach. He understood that sometimes an entire community can label someone an outcast, refusing to question whether that label was earned or imposed. So he took a slow walk through the neighborhood, noticing that each modest home had a similar design, each front yard meticulously kept, with sidewalks lined by carefully planted bushes. At a glance, nothing appeared out of the ordinary. But as Chuck passed one particular house, he overheard a conversation between two neighbors. They were muttering about yet another petty crime that happened overnight. A garden shed had been tampered with. A few tools were missing. The boy's name echoed again, spat out with frustration. Chuck paused, letting the gentle breeze carry their words toward him. He wondered if anyone had real proof or if everyone was simply pointing fingers at the obvious scapegoat. Therefore he nodded politely at the neighbors, who gave him a suspicious glance. He could tell they were on guard because they didn't recognize him. He had only recently come to stay with a relative for a short visit. He offered a friendly wave and moved on. He didn't want to pry too soon. But he tucked away every bit of information he heard. Later that day, he strolled near a local convenience store where rumors claimed Travis often hung around. Chuck noticed the boy leaning against a lamppost, looking bored yet alert, like someone who anticipated trouble might fall on him at any moment. Chuck observed him from a short distance. He noticed how nervous the kid's eyes were, flicking from one passerby to another, probably bracing for another accusation or a dirty look. Chuck approached quietly, hands by his sides, projecting calm. Travis eyed him with caution. Chuck started a casual conversation, asking if there was a good place around to grab lunch. Travis shrugged and mumbled something about a diner 2 blocks away. He looked away as if embarrassed. Chuck asked if he was in school, noticing that it was midday. Travis shrugged again, reluctant to share details. Chuck didn't press. But he offered a gentle smile and thanked the boy for the tip about the diner. He took a few steps away, aware that Travis kept glancing in his direction, unsure what to think of this stranger who dared to speak to him without assuming the worst. Chuck Norris had a gift for reading subtle cues in people's behavior. He noticed how Travis's shoulders tensed whenever someone passed by. He realized that the teen expected them to cross the street or shoot him a scowl. It happened a moment later, an older resident scurrying across the pavement, clutching her purse and glaring at Travis as if he were about to snatch it. Travis exhaled, exasperation etched in his posture. Chuck felt a spark of compassion. He recognized that the weight of collective suspicion can push someone deeper into isolation. Therefore, Chuck made a mental note to observe more, to ask questions, to dig for truth. Over the next few days, Chuck heard one complaint after another from various neighbors. One man blamed Travis for spray painting the side of a mini-mart. Another insisted the teen was responsible for rummaging through cars at night. A frantic elderly woman swore she saw him lurking near her backyard, though she admitted it might have been too dark to be certain. Chuck sensed a pattern. All of these accusations were swirling around but lacking concrete proof. People believed them anyway. He grew more determined to find out why the boy was consistently singled out. He decided to speak with a few more locals. He chatted with the local hardware store owner, who claimed he saw Travis outside the shop shortly before a theft occurred. Chuck asked if he actually witnessed the theft. The owner shook his head, admitting that he hadn't seen anything more than the teen hanging around. But suspicion was enough to condemn him in most people's minds. Chuck continued these conversations with subtlety. He didn't announce his intentions, preferring to gather information quietly. Some neighbors were quick to share their complaints. Others expressed pity for the boy, saying they felt sorry but didn't want trouble. Chuck also heard that Travis's mother worked 2 jobs, struggling to keep the family afloat. His father had left years ago, leaving the boy to grow up without guidance or structure. People shook their heads, saying it was no wonder he turned out rotten. But Chuck refused to accept such lazy conclusions. He thought back to situations he had witnessed throughout his life, moments where someone was singled out by a rumor mill, not by solid facts. Therefore, he decided it was time to approach Travis directly. He spotted him again near the convenience store. Travis was kicking a small stone across the pavement, trying to pass the time without attracting negative attention. Chuck asked if he'd be willing to talk for a minute. The teen eyed him warily, like a cornered stray unsure whether to hiss or run. Chuck spoke softly, telling him he had heard rumors. Travis stiffened, ready to defend himself. Chuck clarified that he wasn't there to accuse. Instead, he wanted to understand Travis's side of the story. The teen swallowed, clearly uncertain how to respond. He had rarely encountered an adult who asked for his viewpoint instead of demanding he confess or leave the area. Therefore, Travis hesitantly described his life. He admitted he hated school because everyone treated him like a criminal. He shared that he'd been taunted for wearing second-hand clothes and for living in an apartment complex on the rough side of town. He mentioned that whenever something went wrong, teachers or classmates looked at him first. This pattern extended beyond the school's walls, creeping into every corner of the neighborhood. He had lost count of how many times people cursed him out or threatened to call the police on him for simply existing. He insisted he wasn't guilty of the petty crimes swirling around. Chuck listened without judgment, focusing on the sincerity in the teen's tone. Travis's voice cracked slightly as he explained how tired he was of being branded a troublemaker. He blinked hard and tried to mask the hurt behind a stoic expression, but Chuck saw through it. Chuck's intuition told him the boy was telling the truth. Therefore, he offered a gentle nod and said he believed him. Travis looked at Chuck in surprise. People rarely said those words to him. Chuck asked if Travis had any idea who might be behind the crimes. The teen shook his head, frustration evident in his eyes. He explained that sometimes he saw shady figures walking the back alleys at night, but he had no proof. He avoided them because he didn't want to be mistaken for an accomplice if the police ever showed up. Chuck thanked him for being open. He then asked if Travis had a place where they could talk privately. Travis hesitated, glancing around to make sure nobody was eavesdropping. Then he led Chuck down a side street to a small, rundown park with faded benches and a broken swing set. Nobody else was there. They settled on one of the wobbly benches. Travis confided that he worried about his mother losing her job if the police came knocking again. He said she was barely holding things together. Chuck felt empathy surge within him. He recalled moments in his own life when a single misunderstanding could lead to disaster for those who were already struggling. Therefore, he assured Travis that he would do his best to uncover the truth. Over the following nights, Chuck took it upon himself to patrol the neighborhood discreetly. He wasn't interested in playing sheriff, but he wanted to see firsthand if there were shady activities happening after dark. He found vantage points near the small grocery store, the hardware shop, and the narrow alley behind a row of older houses. Each night he saw glimpses of movement. Sometimes a stray cat darted by, but at other times he spotted what appeared to be a person slipping between shadows. Chuck's instincts told him that this figure had a plan. He tried to follow quietly, using the cover of darkness to avoid detection. But the figure seemed to vanish whenever he got too close. Chuck realized this might be someone familiar with the layout of the neighborhood. He also noticed that no matter where he went, people whispered about stolen items the next morning, always pointing a finger at Travis. But Chuck was there, and he knew the boy wasn't anywhere near those locations. Therefore, Chuck intensified his efforts, determined to catch the true culprit. One evening, he chose a strategic spot on top of a low roof near the heart of the neighborhood. From that vantage, he could observe multiple streets at once. He kept his eyes trained on the movement below. About an hour before midnight, he spotted a tall figure creeping behind the grocery store. The figure wore dark clothing and carried a small flashlight. Chuck watched as this person fiddled with the door to a side storage room. Within minutes, the figure emerged carrying a handful of items. Chuck took careful mental notes of the person's build and how they moved. He decided to follow quietly, stepping across rooftops in near silence, then descending down a fire escape to trail the suspect at ground level. The figure slunk through the alley, occasionally glancing over a shoulder. Chuck stayed far enough behind to avoid detection but close enough not to lose sight. The figure eventually reached a rundown house on the outskirts of the neighborhood, slipping inside through a side door. Chuck memorized the address. He recognized that this was an area where few ventured. The houses here were older, some boarded up, others turned into cheap rentals. Therefore, Chuck decided he needed to confirm this suspect's identity. The next day, he made discreet inquiries with various neighbors and local shop owners, describing the build of the thief he observed. Nobody had a clue. Or if they did, they were too nervous to say. But Chuck persisted. Eventually, he learned that an older teen named Ronnie had been living in that rundown house with his cousin. Ronnie had a reputation for trouble, though it wasn't as widely gossiped about as Travis's. Some said Ronnie had connections with petty gangs in a nearby city. Chuck pieced the details together. He had a strong hunch that Ronnie was framing Travis for his own crimes. After all, Travis was a perfect scapegoat in the eyes of the community. Chuck realized he needed more than just his word to convince people who already believed the worst about Travis. Therefore, he devised a plan to gather irrefutable proof. That evening, Chuck quietly told Travis that he suspected a guy named Ronnie. Travis's eyes widened. He stammered that he'd seen Ronnie around but never interacted with him. He asked why Ronnie would bother framing him. Chuck explained that if the neighborhood had already labeled Travis as a troublemaker, Ronnie could operate in the shadows and let the blame fall elsewhere. Chuck assured Travis that they would bring the truth to light. He just needed Travis to be patient and keep a low profile for a little while longer. Travis nodded, though his frustration was plain to see. He was sick of people staring at him like he was garbage. Chuck patted him on the shoulder, urging him to trust the process. Over the next few nights, Chuck laid a trap. He knew Ronnie would likely try another theft soon, given how emboldened he seemed by his ability to dodge suspicion. Chuck borrowed a small night vision camera from a friend who lived in another part of town. He also got permission from the local hardware store owner to hide out near the back entrance. The owner was skeptical at first, still somewhat convinced that Travis was behind everything, but Chuck's calm determination eventually won him over. On a chilly evening, Chuck settled into a dark corner near the store's storage area. He had the camera ready, aiming it at the alley. Time passed slowly. Chuck breathed evenly, staying as still as possible. Midnight approached, the streets mostly empty except for the flicker of distant street lamps. He heard a faint scuffling sound. Holding his breath, he turned the camera slightly, focusing the lens on a tall figure approaching from the far end of the alley. The figure wore dark clothing again and carried a flashlight, just as Chuck had seen before. Chuck activated the camera, zooming in enough to capture the suspect's face when the flashlight beam briefly illuminated it. The face matched the description he had heard of Ronnie: short buzzed hair, a scar over his left eyebrow, and a sneer that suggested he felt untouchable. Chuck watched as Ronnie knelt by the back door, fiddling with the lock. Within seconds, he slipped inside. Chuck kept the camera rolling. Moments later, Ronnie emerged with a couple of items tucked under his arm. He appeared to be rummaging for anything valuable, maybe tools or electronics. Chuck got a clear shot of him looking around as if to confirm that no one was watching. Then Ronnie took off toward the same rundown house where Chuck had seen him before. Chuck waited a few minutes, then quietly followed, maintaining a cautious distance. He filmed Ronnie entering the property, apparently stashing the stolen goods inside. Satisfied with the evidence, Chuck turned off the camera and slipped away. He realized he had exactly what he needed to clear Travis's name. The next day, Chuck visited the local police station, requesting to speak with someone about the string of petty crimes. He asked them to keep an open mind. The officer on duty wore a tired expression, having heard countless stories of the supposed troublemaker Travis. But Chuck calmly asked for a moment to show them something important. He played back the footage of Ronnie, clearly caught in the act. The officer's eyes widened. He leaned closer to the screen, recognizing the alley behind the hardware store. The officer was taken aback, surprised that the suspect in the footage wasn't the same teenager the entire community had been accusing. Chuck explained the pattern of scapegoating, describing how the community singled out Travis while Ronnie operated unchecked. The officer frowned but acknowledged that the video was undeniable. Therefore, he told Chuck they would investigate promptly and question Ronnie. Chuck insisted that the police handle the matter with sensitivity toward Travis, who had been living under constant blame. The officer nodded, promising to do what he could. Meanwhile, Chuck decided it was time the neighborhood learned the truth as well. He visited the hardware store owner first, letting him see the recording. The man's jaw clenched when he realized he had wrongly suspected Travis. Then Chuck spoke to a handful of neighbors who had been most vocal against the teen, sharing only enough details to make them reconsider their bias. Some refused to apologize at first, clinging to their belief that Travis must still be involved somehow. But Chuck remained patient, simply stating that the video spoke for itself. Over the next couple of days, the police did their part. They confronted Ronnie, who at first tried to deny everything. But faced with the footage, he had little ground to stand on. Officers searched the rundown house, finding multiple stolen items from different reported incidents. They also discovered a stash of graffiti supplies that matched the paint color used to deface various neighborhood walls. Therefore, the case against him was ironclad. Once news spread that Ronnie had been arrested and that the evidence proved Travis's innocence, a ripple of shock moved through the community. Some neighbors quietly admitted their mistake, while others claimed they had simply gone along with what everyone else believed. But the end result was the same. People realized that Travis had been bearing the weight of blame for crimes he never committed. Chuck made sure to find the teen the morning after the arrest. He spotted him near the same convenience store. Only this time, Travis stood a little straighter, as if a heavy load had fallen from his shoulders. Chuck greeted him warmly, asking if he heard the news. Travis nodded, relief and uncertainty mingling in his expression. He said word had reached him that Ronnie was the culprit, and that folks were no longer accusing him of being a delinquent. Chuck congratulated him, reminding him that the truth often comes out eventually. He said that while life might not become instantly easy, at least Travis wouldn't have to endure false accusations every time something went wrong. Travis swallowed hard, trying to express his gratitude. He managed to say thank you, but his voice shook with emotion. He confided that nobody had ever stuck their neck out for him like this before. Chuck said he did it because he sensed the boy's integrity was being overlooked. He also reminded Travis that in a world where people jump to conclusions, it's important to stand firm in who you are. The teen nodded, blinking quickly to keep tears at bay. Therefore, Chuck asked if Travis would mind introducing him to his mother. He wanted to reassure her that everything was resolved. Travis agreed. They walked several blocks to a small apartment building with cracked steps and peeling paint on the exterior. Inside, the narrow hallway smelled of old carpet and stale air. Travis led Chuck up 2 flights of stairs, pausing at a door with scratched numbers. He unlocked it, revealing a modest living space that was clean but worn. His mother was in the kitchen, wearing a faded uniform from the diner where she worked. The moment she saw Chuck, she looked worried, as if bracing for bad news about her son. But Travis explained that Chuck was the man who helped clear his name. Her face softened, a wave of relief flooding her features. She stepped forward to thank Chuck, her voice shaking. She admitted she had spent many sleepless nights wondering if her son would end up in juvenile detention because of rumors. She had no idea how to protect him from a neighborhood that refused to see anything but guilt. Chuck listened, offering reassuring words. He said it was all over now, that the real culprit had been caught, and that the community might finally leave Travis alone. His mother pressed her lips together, tears threatening to spill. She expressed profound gratitude, though she worried about the hostility that might linger. Chuck nodded in understanding. He suggested that they might consider visiting the police station to get an official statement clearing Travis's record of any suspicion. He also offered to help introduce Travis to some local mentors or community programs that could give him a constructive path forward. The mother agreed, a flicker of hope in her tired eyes. Travis stood off to the side, taking in the conversation. He realized that Chuck was not just a man who fixed the immediate problem but someone who genuinely cared about his future. That realization caused a lump in Travis's throat. He had grown accustomed to a world where people either judged or ignored him. Therefore, he felt overwhelmed by this unexpected kindness. Chuck finished his conversation with the mother, promising to provide any support he could. Then he took his leave, stepping back into the hallway with Travis. The teen walked him to the building's entrance, not quite sure how to say goodbye. Chuck just gave him a gentle nod, reminding him that he was no longer alone. The sun poured into the street outside, illuminating the worn concrete in a soft glow. Chuck and Travis exchanged a final nod. Then Chuck set off, letting the boy return upstairs, hopefully to a future with less weight pressing down on him. Over the following days, talk around the neighborhood shifted. People gradually admitted they might have been too quick to judge. Some apologized to Travis directly, though many avoided him out of embarrassment. Others rationalized their actions, claiming they had simply believed what they were told. Chuck kept a respectful distance, not wanting to force any confrontations. He knew that hearts change slowly. But the truth had been exposed, and that was enough to make a real difference. Meanwhile, life moved on. Ronnie faced charges for the thefts, vandalism, and trespassing. His cousin bailed him out, but the neighborhood now recognized who the genuine troublemaker was. Chuck found quiet satisfaction in seeing Travis walk without an air of constant fear. One afternoon, Chuck saw him at the corner store. This time, nobody crossed the street to avoid him. Travis even managed to crack a slight smile when an acquaintance waved. Chuck nodded approvingly, thinking back to how quickly people can shift their attitudes once faced with undeniable evidence. He felt grateful he had arrived in time to stop the cycle of blame. Sometimes a person's life is shaped by a single act of kindness or a single revelation of truth. Therefore, Chuck kept an eye on Travis's progress from a distance. He noticed the teen occasionally reading a worn paperback on a park bench, head bent in concentration, as if finally able to relax without scanning for suspicious stares. Chuck also heard from the mother, who called him one evening to say that the local authorities had fully cleared Travis's name. She sounded happier than he'd ever heard her, excited that her son might finally have a shot at normalcy. Chuck congratulated her, gently advising that they both stay vigilant, because prejudices can resurface. She thanked him again, saying she would never forget how he stepped in where nobody else dared. Chuck ended the call, reflecting on how even a small nudge in the right direction can spark a significant change. He walked through the neighborhood one last time before he planned to leave, noticing that the atmosphere seemed lighter. The idle gossip about a teenage menace had mostly faded away. People chatted about the upcoming block party and summer barbecues instead. A few waved at Chuck, acknowledging him as the man who helped solve the puzzle. He nodded back politely, never one to seek attention. That night, he slept well, knowing he had done what needed to be done. In the morning, he loaded his suitcase into the trunk of a car, ready to continue his journey. But before he drove off, he spotted Travis hustling down the sidewalk, wearing a slightly tattered backpack, a look of new determination in his eyes. Chuck rolled down the window and waved him over. Travis approached, a curious tilt to his head. Chuck asked him how things were going. The teen replied that life felt different, that he was trying to catch up on school assignments, and that teachers were actually giving him the benefit of the doubt. He paused, then quietly said that Chuck's intervention probably saved him from a path he wouldn't be able to escape. Chuck told him that he was proud of him for keeping strong. He reminded Travis that this neighborhood might still have its challenges, but now people couldn't pin every misdeed on him. The teen nodded, half smiling. Then Chuck extended a small piece of paper with his contact details, telling Travis to reach out if he ever needed advice or a listening ear. Travis took the paper carefully, like it was something precious he didn't want to lose. He murmured a heartfelt thank you. Chuck looked him in the eye, letting the moment settle. Then he offered a final word of encouragement. Keep your head up. Your story isn't over. Travis nodded again, eyes shining with gratitude. Then Chuck tapped the gas, rolling slowly away from the curb. He glanced in the rearview mirror, catching a final glimpse of Travis standing tall on the sidewalk, holding that slip of paper, hopeful for the future. As he steered onto the main road, Chuck felt a familiar sense of satisfaction, the kind that comes from proving something important, that when people take the time to see beneath the surface, they often uncover truths that shatter false assumptions. He recalled the moment he first heard the boy's name whispered in anger, the moment neighbors casually tossed around accusations without evidence. He recalled how easy it would have been for everyone to accept that narrative. Therefore, he breathed a quiet sigh of relief, acknowledging that one piece of video footage and a willingness to listen had turned the tide. He left the neighborhood behind, content that a wrong had been righted. He had done more than pass through. He had changed the fate of a teenager who deserved a second chance. He thought about how rumors can spread like wildfire, consuming innocence in their path. He understood that the world needed people who challenged those assumptions. Therefore he drove on, the sun rising higher, illuminating the road ahead, a road that always seemed to lead him to unexpected people in need. He welcomed it, knowing that true strength lies not just in physical power but in standing up for what's right, especially when no one else will. He pressed forward, already pondering the next situation life might throw at him. He was Chuck Norris, after all, always ready to unravel a mystery, defend the innocent, and walk away without fanfare. That's how everything changed for a teenager everyone called a troublemaker, how truth rose above rumor, and how Chuck Norris proved the world wrong by believing in one boy's unseen worth. But if you crave more stories of Chuck's remarkable interventions, stay right here and prepare yourself for the next gripping chapter on this channel.